Hi, welcome everyone to today's NEBA Book Artist Show and Tell show. It's Sunday, April 23rd at 4 o'clock, which means we're all here to look at really cool beans book arts. We have three artists who have volunteered generously to talk about their work and show their work and what inspires them. And I'm going to get right into introducing them. I have not, as of today, and our show and tells really introduced anyone, but I'm going to be doing that from now on. Maybe it'll be a little bit helpful. So our first artist is Anne McMillan. She's a mixed media book and fiber artist residing in New Hampshire. She uses printing methods, collage, found objects, and natural dyes in her art to convey a story. Her work is an eclectic mix of her life, reflecting on past, present, and future. Each piece that she makes is a time capsule of life, a memory, or a story to be told. She is constantly exploring different techniques, book structures, and materials, and finding ways to combine them into her art. Anne, we are so glad you're here today. Thank you for offering yourself to us, you and your work.
My pleasure. It's nice to be here. Basically, what Carolyn said sums me up. I do love to find things, and my journey into book arts was kind of different from what I expected. I primarily used to be a painter, a printmaker, and a fiber artist. And I moved to Texas from New England for about 8 years. And in Texas, it's just too hot to work with wool. And I went to one of these art shows, but where they sell, people bring their things to sell and whatnot. And there was a book artist who did journals for sale, and I loved them. But the price was, And I sort of looked at him and I said, I can do this. So without ever making a book before, I went home. I had some leather, did paper and whatnot, not knowing if anything about paper grain or anything. And I made it basically a long stitch journal. They came out, I made a few more. Well, then I relocated back to New Hampshire. And when I got back to New Hampshire, I discovered, running around the state and whatnot, I used to live on the other side of the state. So this side was, I'm in Laconia, New Hampshire. So this side was not familiar to me. I met Adele Sanborn at Twigs and sort of got involved at Twigs and took a class with Gail Smudo on altered books. And I said, oh, well, this will be fun. I love old books and whatnot. And that sort of got me started. I first started out really with altered, with her class. And then I started taking actual bookbinding classes, some at, I went to Bennett Street and whatnot to learn actually how to really do a book and fell in love with it. But I live in a house that has like no more wall space. So whenever I would do art, it was like, well, it just got shoveled away. So the book art idea was like perfect for me. It was a way of doing things that I love to do and being able to preserve it. I have a little PowerPoint with pictures that I can talk through as I do it. So when I first started, Gail's class was altered books. And she had a bunch of books, and I grabbed a book from her pile, which was about birds. And instead of just doing an altered book where it was fun little things, I go after my altered books like, okay, what's my subject and what's the story I'm going to tell? This one was all about crows. And just picked something from everywhere that I could find. Some of it was printed out. There's image transfers, painting in it, and move that. My next book, though, I got a little more crazy. I decided to do bugs, but like I was an actual bug person who was, this was my journal of all the bugs that I had found and different things that people had said. I started really delving into history. I love doing research. Research to me is just so much fun. So I'm putting it into books now. Then I went on a trip through Arizona and I said, I had one, those little printers now that you can get where you can print out the little tiny picture. Well, I had one and I started doing that and taking pictures of everything. And then I started going, okay, I'm going to do like an accordion or something. I started stitching. So I kept, these started evolving and I started adding more and more to them. And also this was actually my first slipcase. I love slipcases now that I really know how to do them. But, and keeping with going for stories, I started to change from just altering books to actually making books that told a story. This was a book talking about New Hampshire camps. I'm from New Hampshire and I went to a New Hampshire camp. And I started collecting pictures and I had postcards from camps and whatnot. But at that time, I wasn't yet using original photos. They were still too precious to me, the postcards and all. I collect postcards. I got boxes of postcards and photos. I started doing this, but I also love to do collage. So this was getting me a little more into collaging and also doing accordion books. Then I started, this was one of my more recent books that I did. I had all these cabinet cards. I'm finally starting to actually use this stuff, the cabinet cards I've been collecting and all, and made one more altered book doing stitching on the photos of all the cabinet cards and sort of told a story. This is actually a book about the Women's Choral Society. It was a book of, music. The Women's Choral Society who had a strange habit of murdering their husbands. So each one tells sort of the story. It's like a little poem about what happened to them, how they the bride who, went from the burning house that her husband was still in on her wedding day and whatnot. So I like to have a little bit of fun. But then what happened was I started doing more photos. And I had a friend who passed away and he had tons of photos from his life in his house. And I was the one that went and cleaned it out because he had no family. So I saved them and I started playing with more image transfers and trying to make it very individualized for the person. Like he always wore black blue jeans. I went to Goodwill and bought a pair of black blue jeans so I can do the book covers in black jeans. And these were just pictures from his life and whatnot, that some of them are photo transferred. And I had fun learning how to, basically do some surface design on my pages so that my pages were not just blank pages. I do a lot with tea dyeing. I do a lot with rust and painting. But then what happened was, and this is a little out of order, I discovered Coptic binding. I finally took a class. Someone finally taught me how to do it. And then I taught myself how to do 2 needle. And I also discovered eco dyeing. So this was a book this was actually an Unbound last year. And was sold. That I did with pieces of eco dyeing, and I just kept going, moving it over, neck one step down, and then weaving and whatnot. It's something that for some reason I just love Coptic binding. And I love all the things you can do with it, which we'll start seeing. What do you do with all the leftover pieces of paper, eco dyed paper that and you have a hole punch that does round holes? You start making a 6-foot long book. And a lot of my work is also done using old book pages. rather than, having a blank book. Even if I'm practicing to learn how to make a book structure, very rarely will I use blank paper. I'll rip up old books and whatnot to do the structure. And as I said, slipcases are everything to me. I started still Coptic, but using things that I had around the house, eco-dyed paper, and started stitching into the paper more. And my stuff is very eclectic. It doesn't follow one long, it's like, oh, you can tell that's her work. It just, I probably should do that better, but I don't.
I disagree. I
Yeah.
do think there is continuity in your approach and the look of these items. They're not as disparate, I don't think, as you think they are.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I try hard. Getting into Coptic, like I said, I started doing where I did painted pages and would rip up, big sheets of paper, would rip it up and bind it into Coptic books with just regular book cloth for the covers, or this one has actually acrylic for the cover. This is a class that I teach often now, is doing this painted pages and binding the, it's a way of teaching people how to do 2-needle Coptic, because I teach a lot of 2-needle Coptic classes. And I also, because of my fiber art, I was into dyeing long before people were like the new resurgence of natural dyes. I was doing it back when I was doing rug hooking back in the 90s. So I sat there one day with handmade paper that I had, ripped it all up and started dipping it into different natural dyes. And it's a Coptic binding still, but what I did was, because if you could see the piece holding the circle together, it does fold into a regular book. But what I did was I put in from the Coptic, I have pieces of string on the outside of the thread so that I was able to loop that around. But it was fun just to explore the colors. And then this another one. I also do some encaustic, so the covers are covered with encaustic. And just sewing things in and doing my little round books. Another Coptic. I do get ideas from other people, but a lot of times I'll look at it, something I see online, and go, okay, I like this about it, not that. And I'll try to recreate it. And this was something that there's a book artist, I think her last name is Bolton. She's from like Idaho or something. And she does these books using your old book board. And that's what all these are, is just, those scraps of book board. I save it, all of them. And they're all collaged and covered with encaustic wax. And then to get real, this is one of my latest. So I still in love with Coptic. And I sat there one day, I've had this piece of wood, this box sitting on my shelf for about 4 years. And finally I said, I got to do something with it. And all the covers I did with using just regular muslin. I coffee dyed the muslin, and then I took gesso to it. So it stiffened it up, and then started making, it's tea dyed paper, started making Coptic. That's all 2-needle Coptics, and doing it to fit in. Now, it's not as easy as you would think. It's like putting a puzzle together, and then afterwards you look at, you find out you have a space that's not quite right. So you take one book out and say, forget that one, let's do another one. And I ended up with about 4 books that did not go into this, which will go into something else. But that was an interesting piece for me. And then I discovered drum leaf. To me, that's what it's like. I love book structures. So if I hear of a new structure, I'll take a class and figure it out, or I'll try to figure it out on my own. The drum leaf I loved. I loved the whole idea of I could take my photos and do something like this, where it's a family commemorative. If you go through the book, it starts out with grandparents and great grandparents and goes all the way up to the present day children. So it makes for a nice gift. It's actually my family. So, you know, I use what I have around me. And also I love doing things with tea dyeing, as I said, and rust. And this was something, this is also a drum leaf that I did every morning. I call it January tea. I worked on it every morning. I'd have my tea and I had a piece of paper. I cut the paper all the same size, and I had a little pan, and I would just pour some of the tea in with the paper, and I put rusty pieces on it. And I did this for the whole month of January. And this was the book that came from it. Now, I learned another binding. I actually know a lot of bindings, but this was another one that intrigued me. Ben Elba, who's over in Europe, does all these fantastic bindings. And there are places around here where you can get classes in certain ones. This is the Shrigley binding. It's perfect for postcards. Well, I discovered him, and he also, you can buy his instructions. So I sort of did this by, you know, reading it and figuring it out and doing it. And these were postcards that I collected on a trip out west. And just, what am I going to do with them now that I have them? And so I made a book to do them. Now I've used this binding for several of my books when I've had postcards or things similar to that. And actually in the show in Maine, one of my books was with this same type of binding, which was this one.
Mhm.
And it's the same one, and as you can see, it can stretch out. These were all postcards from Italy that my father brought back during World War II. This was his platoon, or they were the engineers. But to me, I had all this, I've had these postcards since I was a little kid. And it always was, someday I'm going to do something with them. And I have the pictures and whatnot. And I said, oh, why not? This is a perfect binding for this book. And that's what I love to do, is find the perfect binding for whatever materials that I have, whatever found things or whatnot. So, and this is another, you know, it's like a envelope fold type structure. Actually, I learned this in a class with Jody Alexander. And I decided it's coffee stained here, on the pages here. This is cave paper. And what I did was I took cards, and there's actually 16 cards in this that I took actual photos that I bought on the web. You know, they looked intriguing, and did collages for each one. And they're all from the same spot, though, because I could tell when I got them that they were like Northern Canada. You know, you tell by the pictures and what was written on the back that it was basically found from someone's family or whatnot. And in between on this, you know, I have tea dyed paper, but it doesn't really have anything on it. It's just sort of there, right between the things, but you could write something. I am not a writer. That's my biggest thing. The last thing I am is a writer. So the simpler I can do it, just show my books, the better. And sometimes found objects do find their way into books. These are mussel shells, and I had this paper that I got at the book bazaar in Maine about 5 years ago. It was in one of these packages of just, you know, for $2, you can have this whole package, you know, and I have no idea really exactly what it is. Handmade, I know that, but I ended up taking watercolor, indigo watercolor to it. And then I cut it up, and these are all actually separate shells. And I made all books with the mussel shells. which
So those are
was,
the scale of your typical mussel.
pardon?
The
Yeah, they're
scale on
main
these
muscle.
is like a real mussel.
Yeah, they're
Okay,
main
so
muscle.
they're tiny. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not big. They're very small. And
Lovely.
you know, I just put them together there, and I left the linen thread just sort of trailing away and whatnot. To me, it's its own little sea creature. Um, Getting into still eco dyed paper. I do a lot with eco dyed paper. But this is flax paper. It's handmade where you take the flax and you the flax roving and with PVA stiffen it so you can use it. It's great for book covers and whatnot, and making vessels. But I decided, you know, I took a class and I decided, oh, let's try that one and see what I could do with that. And decided the buttonhole stitch book was perfect because it still showed off my eco dyed paper, which I like when I do a Coptic, I like it to show. And did the same thing with that. And I'm almost out. Okay, I love dyeing. And I had all these book blocks that I had made for possible books. And then I started, you know, in the eco dyeing, I started throwing stuff inside of them and throwing them in the pot as they were. And then some of them I took and had an indigo vat and threw it in the indigo vat too. And just loved how they came out, each book. So I ended up winding them with wire and holding them together. Sort of like, you know, when you're sort of goes with my school children theme that I did a whole bunch of stuff on, collages. You know, they used to carry their books all wound together.
And these are so, so beautiful. And we are kind of running into a time crunch. I
Okay.
think we could feature you for a full hour or 2 or 3 or a day. Your work is
Well,
gorgeous.
I will
And
just quickly run you through the last three. That's all I have.
Good, just show them to us
I'll
and
just show them. There's
oh,
that.
oh.
That's one of my latest. So different from everything else as far as the cover.
So
It's
different.
actually envelopes with letters from 1970s in all the envelopes. And this was my last one. This is a class I'm teaching at Twigs. So I do small books and large books, and that's what I do.
You are incredible.
Oh, thank you.
I think there are a couple of questions. You mentioned something about a Shrigley binding, and I know that Arlene wants to know the name of a binding, and I suspect it was the Shrigley binding.
Uh-huh.
Is that the one that had this? It was the one with the zigzag that came out of the spine, right?
The one with the soldiers all
Postcards
over.
from Italy. If you look
Yes.
at the building book virtual exhibit on the website and Anne's work, you can see a lot of different angles of view of it in that actual post.
Okay.
And that's the Shrigley blind, and it's really fantastic.
And the one
How
of
do you
the
spell that? How do you spell Shrigley?
Shigrley. Hold on, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put it in the
Okay.
chat.
there was
And I'll
also
put Ben's
some,
name in it, but there are classes online. Ben is very particular about who can teach a class on one of his bindings. So you actually have to get certified by him to teach one of his bindings. And there are classes that you can take. Aaron Fletcher is one that teaches that binding. Otherwise you purchase his instructions. But I'll put his information in the chat.
Okay.
thank you. There was
Okay.
also something you said about cave paper. What is cave paper?
Cave paper is a flax handmade paper. It's now made in Tucson, Arizona. It's very stiff. It's great for covers. I use it. I use it a lot with my books because it's extremely heavy duty and stiff.
Oh, it looks like leather.
It does. It does. And
Cool.
They make several kinds. It's not cheap, but you know, it's worth the money. It's just makes a beautiful cover for a soft cover book.
But, Christina, are there any other questions in the
I
gallery?
had a couple of comments. So I noticed that are you in the Surface Design Association as well?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Are you part of that 100 show that it's at the Attleboro Art Museum?
No, I'm not. I
Okay,
didn't.
yeah, I was just curious because I've seen some postings about that. Also, we're in the WCA New Hampshire chapter together, right? You're in the Women's Caucus for Art. Excellent. Yeah, yeah. And that's cool too. I really think that I love the narrative stuff that you've done. Kind of turning these objects into a narrative that your collections and all. So beautiful work. You know, just lovely.
Thank you.
Unbelievably inspiring and textural and just jumping in and wanting to be in the environment you're creating.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your work. And wow,
Her listings for workshops are in the Nebo members workshop link in the menu. You can see her twigs, and I think you have another one somewhere else too.
I have one at Sanborn Mills Farm in November. We're making our own brushes and then doing mark making the first day, and the second day we're doing drum leaf using the paper that we marked up.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you
I
so much.
want to do that.
Sign up.
All right. Thank you, Anne.
Thank
and
you.
We're gonna move to our second artist now, Ellen Schiffman. Ellen has been a professional artist for close to 30 years, exhibiting her work in shows, galleries, and museums nationwide. Inspirations for Ellen's books are drawn from across cultures and time, with imaginary and inspiration both from the randomness of nature and the intentionality and splendor of human creations. Like much of her other work, her books are multimedia creations featuring a range of materials and techniques, including weaving, stitching, painting, collage, mark making, photography, paper arts, and more. She does it all. Welcome, Ellen Schiffman. Show us your stuff.
Well, I aspire to do it all, but I wouldn't say that I do it all. I really enjoyed Anne's presentation. It's interesting how you'll see that my work is very different, but there are some threads that really carry through from one to the other. I think a lot of us have a lot of the same passions and interests. I sent my slides to Christina because I can't really multitask. So she's gonna move them along, and I will talk about them as she does that. I am, I was never a book artist until the pandemic. The pandemic really put me into a different place. I had been getting ready for a number of significant shows that, of course, got canceled or postponed, as happened to many of us. And I had a lot of work that was there and ready for the shows when they were going to be rescheduled. But there became the question of what now? Should I just continue along the trajectory? I decided that I was going to take the opportunity to explore and experiment with some things that I had always wanted to explore and experiment with. I also, like Carolyn said, I'm very multimedia. So I had all kinds of art items around my studio. I had mark making and painting and marbling and, fiber pieces. I was mostly a fiber artist for many years. So, and so I decided that one thing that I would dive into was bookmaking, because I felt that it was something that I had always had an interest in. And I also had a lot of material to put in books, rather than having all these loose things around the studio. I wanted to put them together in books. And I really learned most of what I learned about bookmaking online. There were no classes during the pandemic, as you know, and I don't learn well from instructions in a book. So although I have some of the beautiful bookmaking books, I got lost with that. But there are a lot of great demos online. And so I really spent a lot of time looking at those and learning. And so this is the very first book that I ever made. And it was with some indie ink mark making that I already had on hand, and it's a concertina. A lot of the early books that I did were concertinas. I think that they're beautiful for display, where you can see everything at once, and I really like that aspect of them. You can go to the next slide, Christina. So I tend to work in series, and so this is sort of an extension of that series. A lot of black and white and neutral pieces. The top one is made with fiber paste. I'm a real experimenter with material, and so it's mark making on fiber paste. The second one is taped. I like different kinds of fastening. I do a lot of stitching. I do a lot of nailing. I do a lot of stapling, in addition to all the more traditional types of fastening material together. And then the bottom one is plant material, actual plant material that I made into a concertina. You can go to the next one. The next slide gives a sense of some of the painted pieces that I was doing early on. Again, like I've never been primarily a painter, but I had a lot of painted paper around, and they didn't stand alone as paintings, but I found that when I cut them up, I really liked the way they looked in books, and particularly these concertina books. So I made quite a few of these painted books. Okay, can move along. And I did some I learned how to do some pop-up books. And so, these are some that were pop-ups. These are all very small, mostly concertina books. And if you go to the next picture, you'll see a pile. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me talk about this one first. This one was just more fun. It's like, what was I doing during the pandemic? I was talking on the phone with friends and fellow artists and drinking a lot of tea. And so being an artist who never throws anything out, here are all the little tea labels that went into a book. I also do a lot of mark making on tea bags. I don't know if I have any pictures of those, but tea shows up a lot in my work, as just like it did in Anne's. So if you go to the next slide, there's a pile of the early books. I mean, when I get into something, I really get into it. And so I became pretty obsessed with making books. These are all pretty small. They're maybe, 5 inches, 6 inches at the most. But there really were a lot of books by the time I finished this, what I would consider the first phase. A lot of them are concertinas, but there are flag books in there. There are pop-up books in there. There are sewn binding books in there. There's all sorts of things that I was experimenting with. Okay. I too, what happened is that as the weather got warmer during the pandemic, and it seemed like we were going to be there for a while, I jumped into something else that I had really wanted to learn about, which is eco dyeing. And again, hearkening back to what Anne was talking about. And that was not something that I'd ever tried. But as I moved outdoors into my garden and did a lot of hiking, I started making these eco-printed books. And I found that each batch that I did really had a distinct look of its own. And so sometimes I was adding different things that really added different colors to the books. And so I made a series of these eco-printed concertina books. Some of them, I used avocados. Some of them I used black beans. Some of them, all different things. And that was really fun. You can move to the next picture. And here are some of the covers of some of them. I probably made about a dozen of these concertina books, and each one is quite different inside. And I really got into it. Okay. During this particular period, when I was working on these books, I did one of the only books that I don't do books that have a lot of words in them. I am not a writer either. For me, the books are really to gather my own work, or to tell maybe a story of a place or a like some things that have things in common, but they're not narrative. And so this is one of the few books I ever made that really has some writing in it. You can go to the next page. It's called Age Marks, and it's a collaboration between me and my brother. My brother is a journalist and a published poet. And so he just had a book about bark, which really worked beautifully with some of the photographs I was taking of bark at the time. And so I used the same format as those eco-printed books. I put his poem, which is very beautiful. I don't have time to read it to you, but I will be happy to send it to anyone who'd like to see it. And then, Christine, if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of my photography, which are pictures of bark. And like I say, that is one of the few books that has any writing at all. Some of the books that I do have like a simple like a quote or a very terse saying. I do like that sometimes, but I really like the artwork to speak for itself. And there are many of them are organized as this one is. Like there's a theme, it's all bark and different kinds of bark and abstracted bark. And I like that, but there's not a exact narrative to the work. Okay, you can move on. Okay, so another thing that I took up during the pandemic, again in the warm weather, because this is really great for outdoor working, is doing cyanotypes. And I don't know how many of you know what cyanotypes are, but in brief, you apply a certain chemical mix on paper and you let it dry. It's like a watery mix. And then you place items on the paper, put it out in the sun, and the sun develops it. There's no camera involved, although it is considered a photography technique. And a lot of people do use plants, but you can really use anything. I've used lace. You can crumple up paper and make cyanotypes. There's a lot of really interesting things. And this was another technique that I got very hooked on during the pandemic. And if Christine, and here's some of the books that I did with the cyanotypes. This one is just a multi-size cyanotype with a different cyanotype book with some of the pieces I did. And then the next one, this one was, I cut up a lot of the cyanotypes and made them into collages. I'm a very avid collageist. There are about 8 or 10 panels in this book, and so they're all collaged and dimensional. I like dimension in my work and in my book work as well. And then the last one in this series is there's a type of cyanotype. Usually you dry your paper and you do the cyanotype on dry paper, but there's a technique called wet cyanotype, which brings a lot more color into the cyanotype, and you add all kinds of things when the piece is being processed. You add different items from the kitchen, you add different rust items or whatever, and you can achieve some really wonderful colors, although it's very hard to control. So it's all very serendipitous. I would say that I'm a very serendipitous artist. I mean, both with the eco prints and with this, there's my hand in it, but there's also, a lot left up to chance. And I really enjoy what the world provides in terms of imagery for all of my work. So, and from there I tend to work in series. So I'm showing you like a lot of books from different series over the course of the pandemic. These books I got very intrigued with for a while. They're explosion books and also called lotus books. So basically they fold up really small. You'll see the two on the right are they fold up to about 5 by 5. I make little pouches for them, which the cover of the pouch gives some idea of what the imagery inside is. And then if you move on to the next page, you'll see what happens when you open them up. They explode, they, become dimensional. And I really enjoy surprise and, the unexpected. This first one is a book inspired by Japanese notan. And notan is a design discipline that explores darks and lights and negative and positive space. And so I was playing a lot with that in my work, and it made its way into one of these explosion books. And we can look at another. And this one is also a Japanese technique. It's called suminagashi. And is another thing that I learned during the pandemic. And it's a marbling technique that it's a Japanese marbling technique. So it doesn't have the traditional, like the Ibu, I think it's called, the European marbling, which is very bright colors. And this is much more subtle. And so I was doing a lot of that. And this is a Ibu, Sumanagashi explosion book. And the next one, this is a number of different explosion books. I think there were 2 or 3 made with painted papers that I had, and then it became sculpture. So what's a book and what is not a book, and when does a book become, when is a sculpture a book? But these were actual books that I then made into this sculpture, and so that was a lot of fun. Okay, we can move on. So in addition to the kinds of books that I showed, I was learning. I was really eagerly and greedily interested in so many different book structures. And again, like Anne, trying to find the right structures for the artwork that I was making. And there are different structures that work with different work. I really enjoy the Japanese stab binding. So I made a whole series of those, again, with eco prints, but some of them have sewing inside. This book is a waterfall book. If you pull the tab on the right, the leaves cascade and flutter. And so I really enjoy pop-ups in books that move. And so that was a really fun one to work on. And these are drum leaf, which I also love that binding. It's a wonderful binding for displaying artwork because there's no sewing down the middle, and you can really view the whole work of art in one shot. And I really love that. I'm doing a lot of those right now. In fact, I too like the making cases, and I just finished a case that has 6 of the different drum leaf bound books that I've made, and I enjoy that a lot.
Ellen, are your little videos, does one of them have one of the cascading books? Is that what you're going to show us?
No, I'm going to show you
Okay.
something else.
All right, keep going then.
Yeah. Okay, so as this year progressed, and we, of course, none of us knew how long this was going to last when it all started, but we began to feel like this is going to last for a while. So we start moving into holiday time, and generally, I have a lot of fun going shopping for my people and buying things and finding perfect gifts for them. But what I decided this year, because I didn't want to order everything from Amazon, is that I was going to take my 4 main people who we were going to try to get together in person for the holidays. And I was going to make a book for each one of them. And I was going to, for each of those people, I was going to figure out a book that was specifically had them in mind. And it was always going to be a book that I had not tried before. And it was a real learning process. It took me many months to make the books. And so this first one is one that I made for my daughter. My daughter is an avid writer. And my children are adults. So she's an avid writer. And she was also she also organizes literary events. She's a literary creative writing person. And so I wanted to make a book that there would be a lot of blank pages for writing, but because at that time she was curating a lot of events for the Asian American Writers Workshop, I wanted to include a lot of Asian papers and Asian aesthetic. And so this was a buttonhole stitch book that inside has a lot of collage and Asian themed papers and work, but there's also a lot of room to write in it if she wanted to, which I don't think she's done yet. It's very hard to begin to write in a book that is handmade. I know, because I have a lot of them. This was the second of the Hanukkah presents. This was for my daughter's partner. And Tim is a Brooklyn graphic designer. He focuses mainly on computer generated projects, but he's very black and white and very clean. And what will I make for Tim? And so I decided on a portfolio for him. So it's not a book that's bound. If you go inside, Christina, we can look at the inside of it. It's not bound, but it's an unbound book. It's got many pages. I used in this book all of my own photography. The background here are pictures of Carl, and the inside pages, which are all abstracted photographs of mostly nature. I mean, nature just keeps coming up in my work. So you have tree trunks, you have bark, you have the seashore, you have rocks. And so I thought it would be fun to make a portfolio. And so that was a learning process. And for each of these books, I made several books that were just, experimenting and trying to figure out how to do it. And so that's why it took months to make them. But anyway, this was Tim's book. It was a portfolio. Now I'm going to move to the two moving books that I have, just because that was how I recorded them. The first one that you'll see is the book that I made for my son for the holidays. And my son lives in West Hartford, which is about an hour and a quarter from where we live. He was working virtually during the pandemic, and he lives alone. And so as such, he came home and spent a lot of time with my husband and myself during the pandemic. And it was wonderful. I mean, he too is an adult, but it was like getting to spend adult time with him was wonderful. Can we get that to move, Christina? And so this book, because Paul was, kind of participating in all of our activities, we were doing a lot of gardening. He became my right-hand man in the garden. We were doing a lot of hiking. And so I thought an eco book for him with some of the materials that we had collected on our journeys together would be very appropriate. And so I made a stilted concertina, I would call it. And that was really fun. And I felt like that would have some meaning to him. And indeed, he seems to really love it. So I'm happy about that. And then the last one in the Hanukkah series is the one I made for my husband. And this was probably the most challenging book I've ever made. I don't know if any of you have seen the Hugo Peller pop-up book, but this book, when you open it, which you'll see in a minute, it's like a case, but you open it and there's a case within the case. And when you open it, the book actually pops up from the central case. And so you'll see that happen in 1 minute. Here it comes. It pops right out of the center of the book. And this is a very whimsical book. I mean, my husband is a sailor in Maine, and so there's lots of imagery from Maine. There's lots of silly, goofy pictures of his friends and that he sails with, and pop-ups. And there is a poem in this book, so I take it back. There is one other book that I've done that has narration, and this is it. There's a poem about my husband, and that was it. And so that was that project. And that's really the end of my presentation, although I will say I've probably done 200 books since I started. So I am really obsessed. I really love it. I wanted to mention one thing before I go. I am in Connecticut, and there are a number of us in Connecticut, and I wish we lived closer because I'd love to come on some of the field trips. However, I wanted to mention, Christina, maybe a field trip that some people might, an invitation and a field trip that some people might want to participate in. A lot of you know Chris Perry, he was in the last presentation. He's a wonderful book artist, and he's also a curator. And he is curating a show at a local library here, which is called the Mark Twain Library.
Mark Twain Library, yes. He's told me about this.
Okay, and so there are going to be 6 of us in it. He tried to find people because he's curated a lot of shows, and this show has 6 people that he's never curated before, and I'm very pleased that he asked me to be in it. So it'll be my work and 5 other people whose work I don't know, but I've looked them up and they're fantastic. And so Chris and I spoke, and we would really like to invite anyone in the group that would like to come down to Connecticut for a day of book seeing. We would love to invite you. It would probably include a visit to the library, and that exhibit with Chris presenting the various artists. It would include a studio visit to my studio and a studio visit to Chris's studio. We could really do a whole day. My garden is blooming now, so there would be tea in the garden or lunch in the garden.
What
And
are
so
the
it would
show
be-
dates?
The show dates are May 3rd to June 30th.
Yeah, so
And-
Chris and I have discussed it, and he toyed with the idea of adding building books to it, but the turnaround of April 29th in Maine and getting everything down to him and up by the 3rd was kind of troubling. So we decided not to do that. But we would love to talk about it further. We're going to be promoting it in the newsletter for May 1st. So yeah, we should pick a time and create
Yeah.
some kind of NEBA event around it and let the membership know.
Yes, and
Sounds
if
like a great
anyone wants to
idea.
contact us separately because you can't go on a scheduled group or whatever, we would love to have you down here. I'm going to try to get to some of the Massachusetts events. I did get to the show in Maine, and that was wonderful, but it's hard when you're spread out as we are.
What
But we are-
what town is this in, Ellen?
Well, the town that the show is in is Reading, Connecticut. I'm in a very nearby town, Weston, Connecticut, and Chris is in a very nearby town, Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Ridgefield,
But
yeah.
there's all sorts of things we could do. We could invite some of the other artists from the shows to our studios or to the gallery, and we could really have a great Connecticut day and let you all see that there's some really fun stuff happening here. And I'd love to meet some
Awesome.
of you. Yeah,
Nice.
so
Thank you so much. I
Oh,
really
thanks,
enjoyed seeing
Ellen.
it all. Yeah.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Are there any questions from the gallery that want, I know I had one question about fiber paste. What is
Mhm.
that? Is that something
It's-
everybody knows about and I should just keep my mouth shut?
No, it's a gel, it's like a gel medium, but they make a lot of different gel mediums that have different consistency and different texture and different uses. And so, being that I was a fiber artist for many years, I tried to use the fiber paste, and you slabber it on paper, and it's a way to make texture in your paintings. But since I'm not a painter really, I put it on some plastic and peeled it off and then worked it. And it's a very dimensional material that is really fun to work with. I'm just a materials person, and so I'm always exploring different materials. And that one I probably explored when I was doing some of my large frame pieces, and I wanted to add texture, but it really worked nicely in the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Before we move on, thank you. Boy, Ellen, what gorgeous, gorgeous work. Really fun.
Thank you.
Really
Very
great to get to know you and see your work, and
Thank you.
hopefully we'll put something together and we can all come down and you can feed us. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm going to move on to our last artist. I know we're running over time, but holy cow, how do you stop these people? Can you last
Yeah.
another half hour? I think you can, because Marcie Scudder's here. And with her background in architecture and a love of photography, she's found a way to marry the two by reimagining the structure of the book at a much larger scale, using it to shape the experience of space. As a lens-based visual artist grounded in the present moment, her work explores the dualities of fragility and loss, rebirth and renewal, conversations between generations, about our stories and how we pass them on. It's about memory, how we remember what we remember and who. Marcie is a self-taught artist, loving and learning this new form of expression. Marcie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, thank you. So my presentation is going to be rather short. I decided during COVID to go back to get an MFA at Maine Media, and it is the end of the semester, so I had kind of been very busy with that. So I will share my screen, I think. You can see everything on my website, all the other things. This is, and I don't know if you can, so when I began at Maine Media, I began as a photographer, and I knew that I wanted to I thought I wanted to make artist books. And I started going bigger and bigger and bigger until I'm making things like this. So basically I'm doing paper sculpting. And this is this.
What kind of paper is that made from?
This is Red River 60-pound paper, just very ordinary paper. I print on both sides. I fold and cut and sew, endlessly repeating. I can pull out some other pieces, or if I
Would
wish.
you like me to show your NEBA member page, your listing?
Yeah, you could do that. Show the NEBA member page. You can also show my website. I can bring over the other dress, my preliminary sketch dress, but it's on the website. So go ahead. Oh, I keep trying to slide, but you're going to slide. So these are just repeated. I learned this in one of Stephanie Wolf's workshops. And they're just a repetition of these squares sewn together into a quilt. And I would just slide down to the end, to the bottom of the page so you can see them. So this is the process of me kind of exploring, and then keep scrolling, and how this got put together.
You can interact with these.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
And they're meant to be interactive. They're meant to be fully immersive experience, sculpting space, all that. So these were about the sky. This was done during COVID, and the only constant was the sky. So I photographed the sky incessantly, obsessively, and this was sort of the result of that.
So these are photographic prints onto
They're
this
all-
paper you're talking about, right?
Right. Yep. And then if you go to the next one, which was my mother's garden. You can see how I took that.
Oh,
So
that's beautiful.
yeah, and there's a video of this somewhere, I think, down at the bottom. So this is a sort of same concept. I had thought I wanted to do some geodesic domes, but they, without some sort of structure, they don't, paper and thread don't fold together. So I developed this kind of triangular form that became I cut all the photographs into triangles, which sewn together become hexagons. And then one hexagon after another, keep sliding. Okay, keep going. So you'll see them all kind of.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. And then the last one, I don't know if the next one was a video, but somewhere down there's a video. Or no, maybe not. Well, I can give you lead you to the video if you want, Vimeo. And then I got into a winter garden, which was my next thing. So these are all, so it's kind of bookmaking on steroids, actually. Moni Bear, which is the winter one.
That's lovely too. These are really, really beautiful.
What kind of paper is it again? You said
It's Red River 60-pound polar mat, I believe it is.
River.
Red River. So it's
River.
not. It's
You print individually these as photographs as well, right?
correct. Yeah, and I print on two sides so I can cut and fold them. And that's what they look like, just to give you.
Extraordinary.
It's kind of obsessive stuff.
Like a sculptural kaleidoscope.
Well, that's what it's meant to be, is a sculpture. And I am interested in the three-dimensionality of them. Okay, here you can see this one has my angle, it's super slow. I don't know. Anyways, it's fine.
Oh, Marcie, these are exquisite.
So it's very different than the other two
Oh,
bookmakers we've seen.
Let's hope so, right?
Yeah.
Such subtlety. That's lovely.
Can I
Here's my mother's, here's the mother's garden, the other one. How did you get there? That's great. I don't know how you got there, but it's fine.
It came up.
Good.
How are the pieces joined together? Are they sewn or?
So it's a pamphlet stitch, a really simple pamphlet stitch, but like on this one that I'm doing right now, I was kind of multiplying it all out. I've probably done about 3,000 cycles, which is crazy. So anyway, this is the,
And you have to have those really lovely.
I think these are all just
The
different
same, yeah.
videos that for some reason are all coming up. So,
Anywhere else
oh,
we're
you know what
gonna
it is?
go?
Installations is where you'd see the videos. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there.
I think we just saw this one though. But these
Yeah.
are some installation photos of them. And this is going to be shown again in a local gallery here in Barry, Vermont next month. So I'm kind of, and every time I hang it, it's hung differently because it's in pieces and depends on the space. So it's kind of fun to do.
I like your Instagram account too, because that gives us
Process.
sometimes it's more just photographic and you know, I
Yeah,
mean, just
well,
I love your overall kind of patternation and simplicity and elegance of some of these imagery. I just think it's really nice. I'm not a big fan of landscape, so for me to give somebody compliments is actually a big deal.
well, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I love this one too. How
It's my
wonderful is
granddaughter,
that?
and this is, yeah. Well, part of this whole, the concept behind this whole piece, poppies are about memory and remembrance and telling stories. And so my granddaughter is telling her the story.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, Marcie, thank you. Do we have any questions from the group for Marcie? Let me get a view, my gallery
Tell
view.
me about your main media experience. We have a couple of people that teach occasionally at main media that we have listings for in our workshop listings, but I've never studied there. But it looks like they've decided to expand their notion of what they were teaching over the last few years to really suck in a whole lot more book arts into their program, which I love seeing.
I think book arts has become, I wouldn't say mainstay, but it's become a huge part and piece. I think Sue Miklevitz, I think I'd say she can speak to that too, because she graduated ahead of me. I'm in the MFA program, but their book arts is with Richard Wright-Smith. He leads that, and it's become huge and very good. And I've loved taking their classes. And the MFA program is just a constant conversation with yourself, just as they say, just keep evolving and growing. And I'm in the second to last semester, so I think I've finally figured it all out, which is about right. And or figured out what I'm doing or what it means to me. And then I have to write my thesis next semester. So yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Great.
That's exciting to be able to have time to do that.
It's a lot when you get older. I have to say. It's a privilege and it's a challenge both. There's a lot of things pulling at me in different ways, but it's all good.
Well, thanks for being a NEBA member and sharing your process and your journey with us, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. It's not your traditional one, but it's, I still want to get back into small books, but not time for it now. We'll see.
Well, you're making little books and sewing them together into something fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really from a photo-based mixed media kind of lover, I've been really enjoying seeing how you're using your photography in a different way. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, it's photography reimagined for sure.
Yeah.
I still begin with the camera.
Yeah.
Well,
it sure helps to be able to photograph your installations and all your beautiful artwork, right? So you can get high quality pictures yourself. Yeah, that helps.
True.
Yeah,
too. But you know what? Most of my own work I'm photographing with my phone. By the way, here's the other dress that you wanted to see. So.
Oh yeah.
This is sort of my sketch of a dress, the first one I did, and it got me to the next step. So, which you can see on the website, I think. on the NEBA website.
And you have kind of a bustier behind you.
Yeah, you mean this her? Yeah,
No,
she's
farther
To your
off.
left.
oh,
Yeah.
this little guy, this little
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a miniature one. That was sort of my first one. That's what I kind of do my mock-ups on. You see
Can
her?
you bring it forward? It doesn't look miniature. I'm interested
Oh,
now to
yeah,
see
okay.
what miniature means.
She's I think she's third scale.
Oh, she is miniature. Yeah. Okay.
How
Here
wonderful.
beside me, she's like this little thing.
Behind you with the distortion of the camera, it looked like it was
She
big
was
with
full
the one
scale.
right there. Yeah.
That's cool. That's funny. Yeah. No, she's a little guy.
Playing with scale.
Well, I never imagined I was going to go to this scale, and I just kept going and going. So it started off as, oh, these little projects, and yeah, that's how it's
Very,
gone.
very nice.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marcie.
Thank you
and
for
thank
having
you,
me.
to Ellen and Anne for sharing today. Just amazing work. I'm so glad y'all stayed with us through this. We have our next show and tell on May 21st, which is a Sunday at 4 o'clock. We've got Carol McNamee.
McNamee,
McNamee.
yes.
I never get those right. McNamee, Elisa Lanzi, and Allie Manning. Right now signed up, so don't miss it. You never know what you're gonna see here. That's what show and tell's all about, is such a great surprise and the endless, as we know, endless inspiration.
I'll be updating the calendar section on the website with all the next links and the information over the next couple of days, so that'll get caught up. We've got some fun posts coming, which will be looking back at the previous field trips that we just took. So we've got some nice images and discussion about some of the places that we just visited, which is great. And we gonna get together, do some zine action coming for the summer. We get the zine swap and some interesting looks at how to do editing of content in different directions. We're going to get different members who approach zine making in multiple different directions. So taking an artist book and then reducing it into a zine, or making a full-size artist book out of zine content you already have. Different ways of thinking about editing and the rough, and a little bit fancier with Photoshop. So we're going to get a couple of workshops. Yeah,
All good ideas.
Gonna learn some stuff over the summer with zine production. Yeah, so a little bit of workshops coming our way, and we take a little less interactions over the summer because I have to catch up with all the website updates and everything. So not as much exciting stuff during the summer, but we'll be back again for one more May show and tell, and then we'll start lining up for September, October, November, and on. So if you haven't done a show and tell yet, and you want to, we would love to get you to email Carol. Wrong direction. Email Carolyn. She's the one and only.
Please, we want to see all your work, and we want to thank Christina for what she does for us. I mean, we wouldn't be here without her. Please, please. And if you have any time at all when you can volunteer for a meeting, or putting together a field trip or something, anything, all of us can.
Yeah, we definitely want to get out of the Boston
experience.
metro area and start spreading the love. New England is what is in our title, and I really do want to evangelicalize our love of that's a weird word, I know, to choose. I'm choosing it on purpose though. We're going to be book artists evangelicals. We're going to get out there and hit as many people with the book arts as we can and just promote it more and more. And I do want to shout out to Laura. Hi, Laura. She's our absolutely newest member. She just signed up a little while ago. So welcome to NEBA, Laura.
Hi. Nice. This was an amazing display of work. Thank you.
Excellent.
It really was. So join us again and think about over the summer how you can help us out so we can really make NEBA a full experience, because it's volunteer driven. Volunteers. That's all we got. We got no staff. We got no site. We only got us. So, and we all have talent.
There's a lot of talent, and all we need is to get a couple more people to help out, and things get a lot easier for everyone.
If anyone has the skill of adding and subtracting with a calculator, you could be our treasurer.
I think we're gonna have to just pay somebody for that job. And once we
Need
get the money
someone
from Mass
adding,
Cultural Council, we can actually do that. We're gonna hire somebody to do the
Adding.
books.
it's just adding and subtracting on
That's
a
the worst job
calculator.
of all.
Come on, baby. If you love numbers, give it to us. So,
Okay.
we're gonna say goodbye.
We're gonna say goodbye. Have a great rest of the
Everybody,
weekend.
thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.